Well, good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Lunch Update, our program to help you stay curious, connected, and informed, all live and in real time. This conversation, like all of our Lunch Update programs, are made possible by our presenting sponsor, Perkins Coie, with an additional thank you to the Accelerate sponsors of Baker Tilly and Easy Office Products. This September, the Chamber sent out its second annual Next Normal, or N2 survey of regional employers to understand the future of work in the workplaces in this region. And today's program will feature a conversation about the results of that survey with some of the members of the N2 work group, Mark Binkowski of Urban Land Interest and Chad Lawler of the Madison Area Builders Association. The webinar chat is open today, so please ask questions and we'll try to find some time to either reply live in the discussion, or we will do our best to reply in the chat. And as always, you should feel free to use emojis to react to what the guests are saying. And as we prepare to dive in, I do want to give you a few chamber updates. 1 week from today, which will be November 13th, we'll host our next Chamber 101. So whether you're brand new to the chamber or considering joining or just want a refresher on the benefits of being a chamber member, this is a great way to learn more about our work and connect to the chamber staff and other members in a very succinct, easy to digest format. You can register at the link that's put in the chat just now or on our website at madisonbiz.com. And then last month, we hosted the 72nd annual dinner, which brought together nearly 1,300 of the region's businesses and community leaders for an amazing night of celebration and reflection on the future of our region. The event's theme was Switch, and it encouraged us to think about the decisions that we have to make to keep this region on the right track. Our keynote speaker, Redfin Chief Economist Daryl Fairweather, showed us how we can use economic principles to make choices that benefit the most people. I want to thank everyone who attended annual dinner, and thank you certainly to all of our sponsors, and we look forward to seeing all of you next year at the 73rd annual dinner. At annual dinner, we announced a major update to our B. Madison suite of talent recruitment resources. This platform is free to access and to share, and you can learn more about how to take advantage of B. Madison in the link in the chat, or you can go to madisonbiz.com, our website, madisonbiz.com/brand. And one of the most exciting components of the B. Madison work is the Madison Pitch. It's a proven library of downloadable content designed to strengthen your place-based recruitment efforts. We'll discuss this in more detail soon, but one of the key findings of this employer survey was access to talent is the #1 barrier among businesses in this region. And so we are facing and have been facing a talent imperative in Greater Madison. And to manage and maintain that growth, we need to recruit talent from outside our region. And the Madison Pitch is designed to do just that. If you're a chamber member at the Accelerate or Lead level, you already have access to the base deck of the Madison Pitch, which includes our 10 most requested slides and the accompanying narrative. And now there's additional investment opportunities, which include on-demand data insights and customized training, either for one member of your team or your entire HR and recruiting staff. And these trainings start next month in December. You can learn more about the Madison Pitch at the link in the chat. If you have questions or you're ready to sign up for a training session, please send an email to info@bmadison.com. Again, info@bmadison.com. And now on to today's program. But I'd first like to take a step back and provide some background on what the work group, who it is, and what we discovered in the survey to help set the stage for our conversation today. As you can see, these are those who are our participating partners. So a great diverse set of partners, certainly a regional impact, and none of this would have been possible without these partners. We had 241 unique businesses respond through that collective reach of all those partners, and the survey was open for 3 weeks. A majority of the responses came from Dane County employees. 83% have headquarters in Dane County. 57% what we would consider small businesses, so they had 50 employees or fewer. And then the top industries, we had a great set of inputs from 20 different industry sectors, but the top 5 were construction and trades, business and professional services, nonprofits, finance and insurance, and food and beverage. One of the main things that we look at from the survey is to track overall business sentiment. And sentiment among the region's businesses was notably more positive this year than last year. Last year, 15% of businesses reported decreasing their workforce. This year, that number is down to only 10% decreasing their workforce. And looking ahead to 26, only 5% of businesses expect to decrease their workforce. Revenue similarly increased compared to last year, 2024. 29% of businesses reported decreasing revenue from the prior year. This year, that number is down to 16%. And looking ahead, only 9% of businesses expect to see decreased revenue next year. Another area where opinions increased was the general business climate. Last year, 92% of businesses rated it as average or better. This year, that increased to 97%. So an already extremely good or great rating got even better. And although businesses reported being better overall and having a positive outlook in the business climate locally, a majority said that they are experiencing increased uncertainty compared to last year. And this number increases when you look at our most vulnerable businesses at 62% of small businesses facing uncertainty versus 51% of businesses facing more uncertainty in 2025 than 2024. And the main effects of this uncertainty are listed here. Of that 51% that said they were experiencing uncertainty, 43% said they are decreasing their profit expectations. 37% are delaying expansion or investment. 31% are pausing hiring. 30% have increasing costs to customers, and 24% report seeing fewer customers. Madison's talent market continues to receive high marks, with 93% of businesses rating local talent quality as average or better. And the availability of talent saw a modest increase from last year. So in 2024, 82% of businesses rated availability of talent as average or better. This year, businesses rated the availability of talent 86% average or better. As with last year's survey, access to talent was the top identified barrier this year. Thus, the reason for the Madison pitch. When the proportion of businesses citing this barrier decreased, though, from 49% last year to 41%. So still the top barrier, but less companies identifying it as their top barrier. This tracks with our earlier result, which showed a modest increase in the availability of talent. So it's still a problem, but it is getting better and it's down from last year. Inflation also decreased as a barrier. So last year, 47% of businesses of those who identified barriers, identified it, 47% said inflation, down to 40%. And maybe the most surprising and largest change of the barriers from last year came from tariffs and trade, which increased as a barrier from 5% of businesses in 2024 as a barrier to 36% this year. That went from, to put that in context, that went from the bottom ranked least common barrier last year to the third most common barrier this year, with the first two barriers decreasing in the businesses that identified as barriers. The other common barriers were consumer confidence and government regulations. Last year, one of our most surprising results was 49% of our region's businesses, nearly half, were not using AI in any way. At least they didn't realize they weren't intentionally using AI in any way. As I think we would all expect, that this year that proportion has decreased to now 21%, about 1 in 5 still identifying that they are not using AI in any way in their business. And despite this increase in AI usage, AI integration within businesses' workflows is still being worked on. And a majority of businesses said that they use AI, but that AI was minimally integrated into their business. And most of the uses for AI remain generative or time saving, so using Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude. But content creation and design, administrative support, marketing and advertising, business and analytics, automation and R&D were the top uses identified by our regional businesses for how they are currently using AI. And among those that were not using AI, the top reasons cited were a lack of applicability to their business, certainly a lack of knowledge of the capabilities and how to use it, concerns about privacy, security, and bias, and then a lack of the required data that it would take to use AI. And when it comes to in-office or remote 51% of businesses are in person this year. That's a decrease. So last year, 56% of businesses were identified as fully in person, and this year it's 51%, so slightly lower of fully in-person businesses. We expect the proportion of fully in businesses to stay roughly about the same next year, with 49% saying they plan to stay fully in person in 2026. So as we've been thinking about where does this settle, it seems like just around half of businesses are settling into fully in-person workforce. On the other end of that continuum, fully remote, so the proportion of fully remote businesses stayed relatively consistent from 4% last year down to 3% this year. And then when we asked, what do you expect to do next year? Again, 3%. And so we're seeing more organizations look at hybrid work, but those sort of bookends of about half in person and 3% fully remote seem to be what we should expect in 2026, which would then cause us to believe that hybrid office is on the increase. So 40% identified hybrid office use last year, and this year it's 46%. And we asked companies, what do you expect to do in 2026? It went up just slightly to 48%. And so we expect that to be sort of the landing point for that. When it comes to higher education, 83% indicated the ways the ways in which they engage with and are positively impact educational institutions. And the top ways that respondents identified are listed here: made it easier to recruit talent, 40%, increased the quality of life, 38%, increased the customer base, 34%, provided training and upskilling, 27%, and events and tourism, 24%. When we asked about opinions around population growth, so we asked, well, how do you think population growth is going? Is it going too fast, too slow? Is it about right? 65% said that the region's population growth is about the right pace. And when we asked the other side of that equation on housing growth, 62% said the housing growth in the region should be faster. So people think population growth is going as it should, but that housing growth needs to catch up. And then when it comes to emerging benefits, so things that we're looking for, what is the future of how people are recruiting and retaining talent? And so the things that we asked about with emerging benefits, are you offering flexible schedules? Roughly the same, 63% to 64% this year. Professional development also within that margin of error, 61% last year to 64% this year. Paid mental health or personal days, 41%, staying the same at 40% this year. Paid parental leave saw a pretty significant jump from 31% offering paid parental leave to now 39% this year. And then wellness benefits dropped from 36% to 32%. And so with that, we certainly appreciate the time. I'm going to start to bring in our guests to further unpack this new data. And so I will bring in our guests. So I see Mark is on. There's Chad. So gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. We certainly appreciate the time that you're spending with us. Let me just quickly identify who you are, and then we're going to get into some questions. So Mark Binkowski is a shareholder of Urban Land Interest, a real estate management company and investment firm that services more than 150 local clients, including the Chamber. He previously worked as a financial analyst with Jones Lang LaSalle's corporate solutions business in Chicago. And Chad Lawler is the executive director of the Madison Area Builders Association, an organization of regional builders and contractors. Chad's been with MABA for almost 10 years and has served as the executive director since 2018, and he was previously a practicing attorney. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Zach.
So we just covered some high-level aggregate data. I'm curious about what stood out to each of you, and does the data that we just shared and that you've seen as partners in the survey, is it what you're hearing from your colleagues and peers in the business community?
I'd say it wasn't overly shocking. I think a lot of the information mirrors what kind of our members in the construction residential area have been telling us for a couple of years now, that there's a level of uncertainty with pricing, interest rates, trade issues, but they're still optimistic because there's such a demand for housing and there's such a need for that industry that they've been optimistic. So I think I can kind of see that as the community is growing and the Madison area is growing, that there's a reason for optimism, but there's so many hurdles that are needing to be jumped along the way that it causes that kind of cautiousness.
Yeah,
Mark, how about you?
I think Chad, you're kind of hit the nail on the head. I think people are generally pretty optimistic, right? I mean, you look at the revenue and the profit growth numbers and people's expectations for next year, and so I think big picture, right? The businesses are still feeling fairly optimistic. Granted, there is a lot of uncertainty and question marks that we're all grappling with. But I think if you look at how the businesses in Madison and Dane County are doing, that optimism is probably more so than what you'd find elsewhere, and that's certainly what we're seeing from an office space perspective. Our occupancies in downtown are a lot higher than the national averages. So I think big picture, things are still going well. Businesses are still feeling, pretty optimistic and confident, but there's quite a bit of uncertainty and challenges that people are navigating at the same time.
Were there any surprises? So, Chad, anything in there that you just said, wow, I would not have expected that?
So there was a couple for me. One, obviously we deal with residential housing and for, the last decade I've been pushing, hey, we need more housing. And that hasn't always been, excuse me, the the shared opinion. Obviously this is coming from the business community, so they're a little sharing more of our opinion on it, but just seeing that 62% said that it should be growing faster was a pleasant surprise for us. I also thought the lack of AI usage still for 21% seemed a little odd. Now, granted, construction trades being 16% of that, it's a very hands-on in the field type job that might contribute to that 21%, but I'd say those are the two that jumped out to me.
Mark, how about you?
And
Anything,
I
any
think for me,
surprise?
it's probably that sort of decrease that we saw in companies saying that they're fully in office and that increase in hybrid. I'm wondering if that might just be a result of who responded this year versus last year. I think overall we're seeing a trend where the demand for office space is really growing and is fairly strong here on the square, downtown specific. So I think we're seeing more people, looking to bring employees back into the office than they are moving towards remote. So again, I wonder if that's just, a factor of who responded. So that one surprised me because I would have expected it to be the other where we're seeing, a decreasing number of people responding that they're moving to hybrid and more people saying that they're going back to fully in person.
Yeah, I think it's probably as I think about the data and maybe as we think about it next, I think it's a good point, Mark. My guess is because we would have identified ourselves as hybrid because we have remote optional on Friday, but we're in the office, fully staffed, full expectations that you're in the office Monday through Thursday. And so it's probably a little bit of that too, of where they
Yep.
have create a little bit of flexibility, but dominantly they're in the office because we're seeing the same thing you are, is that, the parking garages feel a little fuller and a little harder. You got to go down a couple more levels to find parking nowadays.
Yep. Exactly.
When it comes to talent and rising costs, so those were last year's top two business barriers. We certainly saw businesses identifying those less than they have, but it's still the dominant concerns. You know, and when we saw, obviously, I highlighted, I mean, maybe the big surprise, maybe it's not a surprise, but I think the one that really startled me was the significant spike, almost a 7x increase in tariffs and trade. And not something we can control. I mean, there are certain things that we can be doing around building more housing, Chad, or building the right type of office space and the right mix and the right locations. On your side, Mark, to make sure that we're accounting for what businesses need, but not much that we can do around tariffs and trades. I guess I'm curious, though, even though we can't control it, we know people are either nervous about it at best or impacted about it at worst. How are you seeing that with your members, Chad? What's going on in the home building trade?
I'd say, speaking directly to tariffs and trade, it I think that's one of the areas that is causing the most uncertainty with a lot of our builder members as well as other members who are affiliated with the construction industry because there's this level of unknown. Um, you know, Back in late May, early June, when some of the tariffs were starting to come on, especially for softwood lumber and the Canadian tariffs. Um, Instantly some companies increased the price on their products by 20 to 30%. And then Trump pulled that back, and all of a sudden that price increase came back. Now with the new tariffs that have been implemented, we haven't seen that matching price increase yet. So I think there's a level, okay, did we overstep? Like, do we have to wait, see if the administration actually maintains the tariffs, if they have the implications, what we think they are. Yesterday, the Supreme Court just met to see if Trump could actually use some of the powers he's been using to implement the tariffs. So I think there's a level of uncertainty there. There's definitely a price increase, but I think it could potentially be worse if, these are long-term items. But currently, I think it's just creating that uncertainty. There's some homeowners who are sitting on the fence. They got the good news on the interest rate starting to come down, and then all of a sudden, now they're getting the uncertainty of trade. Is that going to increase the price of housing? And so, again, it's just another hurdle that I think doesn't need to be there necessarily, or is at least creating uncertainty and unease.
Yeah. Mark, when I think about your tenant mix, I mean, you've got uh, some of the most prominent technology companies, you've got legal, you've got accounting, you've got nonprofits, you've got, other affiliated service providers, who desire to be in high quality space around the square. But I'm curious, in that sort of diverse tenant mix, are you hearing from any of those sectors about how this issue around trade and tariffs is impacting them directly?
Probably not as much as the survey would lead you to believe, and I think that's largely as a result of the tenant mix, right? I mean, if you look at banks and lobbyists and law firms and professional services firm architects and designers, right? I mean, they're not necessarily impacted as directly as Chad's members would be based on those tariffs. I think the uncertainty that brings certainly has an impact. We have seen it show in, I'll say, unexpected places. I was talking with one of our restaurant tenants who focuses, foreign cuisine, and they were talking about how the tariffs have a lot of what their specialty foods are imported, and they were talking about the impact that the tariffs were having on the cost of the food that they were bringing in. And so, again, you think about a restaurant, you think about sort of local supply chains, but even avocados from Mexico, or a lot of that food does get, especially given the winters we have here, is getting imported from various places. And so I think I've started to hear that coming up, which I probably wasn't thinking about or anticipating. So, but I think broadly, with more of the white collar professional workforce around the square, it's not quite as talked about.
Just to close disclosure, avocados from Mexico is trademarked. Of that 51% that said they were experiencing uncertainty, I think maybe the risk in all of it is that we see the counterbalancing action that businesses are identifying. Here's how we're managing what we see in that uncertainty. And so it's whether they're feeling it today or whether they're worried about going to feel it tomorrow. We saw businesses were decreasing profit expectations, they're delaying expansion or investment. Some were pausing hiring. What do you make of that action in response to the uncertainty? Is there do those surprise you, that those are kind of the reactions to the uncertainty?
I think those are, if you're running a business and you're uncertain, it's probably best practice to pause or go fully into it. I think retracting too much can hurt the businesses, but I could see there being reason to pause or maybe not to move forward with some large initiative if you're feeling uncertainty or if potentially financing is there. So I guess to me, those seem like reasonable uh, survey results in that regard. I know from a lot of the members that we've heard, they would like to expand in some regards, but their problem is less on the uncertainty of, the demand for housing. It's more on the labor side of it, which is the second part of that question. As far as with trade and everything, there's still issues with that where that's a barrier that's preventing them from doing things. So I think that kind of fits in there as well. Like, hey, we're not doing our expansion because we can't. We'd love to do more, but we're limited in that regard.
Yeah. Mark,
Yeah,
anything on that, or anything you think that the survey missed? Is there any kind of, are there any?
No, I mean, I think the wait and see is, what we'd expect, and certainly what we're hearing a lot of, right? People are just kind of biding their time to see. I mean, frankly, I think we've all been probably saying that for the last 12 months, and we're hoping we'd have more clarity on some of these questions at this point. So not at all surprising to see that kind of continue.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything you think the survey might have missed?
I don't think that the survey really missed anything. Really the question that, or the thought that comes to my mind is our economist for 24 and for 25 kind of said, hey, this is the year that we're turning the corner. And then it kind of just leveled out. And so I think there's, as I look at it, is the uncertainty because of new barriers, or is it because of expectations that those barriers were going to get easier to overcome? And so maybe that's something we can kind of look at in the future. Is this a level of expectation that's causing uncertainty? Because there's the anticipation that, hey, 24 is going to be great. 25 is going to, then we're going to take off. This delay in the kind of expected takeoff of the economy.
Mhm.
Potentially could be something that we could add to the survey.
I thought I highlighted it when we were quickly going through sort of the top line numbers, but asking people what they thought about the region's growth, right? And so we asked that in sort of two ways, population growth and then housing growth. What we saw was the pace of Madison or Greater Madison's population growth thought it was about right, which is a good sign, right? People don't feel that it's a runaway train. And that's roughly about the same percentage that said that the housing growth needs to be faster. At annual dinner, we announced and slightly joked that last year we said 1 million people in the region, and that people said that's chamber math. And then I said we got it wrong. It's actually now 1,025,000. And that's not just us. That's a regional data group, a series of experts locally who are predicting that Dane County is going to add 325,000 new residents in the next 25 years. And that means 150, 160,000 additional housing units, depending on, are they single or, we just don't know exactly what the mix will look like. Now, today, we know we recruit largely younger single talent to Madison. That may shift in the next 25 years. I guess, Chad, as we kind of stare down those numbers and we think about 150, 160,000 more housing units in 25 years. How are your members preparing for that kind of growth, even with some of the headwinds you talked about around some cost issues, some talent issues?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to prepare for until we get the labor force figured out. And, we partner with the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County to create the McKenzie Regional Workforce Center to try to get youth in our area to consider jobs in the skilled trades and construction industry. A lot of the local schools are kind of pushing towards that blue collar, no college debt kind of pathway, which they hadn't previously done. And I think that's going to be kind of paramount to it because we've seen national builders try to enter the market and they don't make it because there's no labor for them to use. I just received the numbers this morning. We're just over 1,000 new home builds through October. And so if you think about it, in 2005, 2006, we did about 2,500 to 2,600 new home builds. So we're maybe at 50% of that best case. And that's kind of where we've sat for the last 4 or 5 years. A lot of municipalities want single family, owner occupied versus a ton of extra multifamily. But I think, from those numbers, it's pretty good, much going to be to get to 160,000 housing units. A fifth of that might be single family unless we fix the labor market. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to keep up. And the National Association of Realtors had mentioned that if we keep everything the same right now, it's going to take the Midwest 41 years to build their way out of the housing shortage. I almost feel like that number's shy. But again, I think really getting that labor to come in to be able to meet the demand will be the most important thing. And we're working on it to an extent, but it's definitely going to need a community-wide push to bring in more labor.
Yeah. I mean, what's scary about the number of the 41 years is they're just talking about the 16,000 housing units that we underbuilt.
Right.
They're not even talking about the 160,000 coming, right? Mark, I think, most people on the broadcast today are business leaders. They know ULI as a preeminent commercial uh, property owner downtown. But those of us who've been around the company or just go to your website, you can see you also do have residential. How are you thinking about the residential mix in your future portfolio?
And I think as we look at Madison and Greater Dane County, there's no question that we just need more housing of all types, right? Whether it's affordable housing, which is certainly talked about a lot and desperately needed, whether it's market rate housing, single family apartments. The only way we're going to solve this issue is through more housing. And, we certainly want it to be done well, and we want it to be done thoughtfully, and we want to make sure that we're, building housing where we have the infrastructure that can support that. One of the things that the survey isn't really able to get to but it comes up a lot, is that lack of talent, right? That's one of the big barriers for businesses. And, I wonder how much of that is a result of people not being able to find housing, right? If you're going to take a job and potentially move to a new city, what's the first thing you do? You go and you look at where you're going to live, whether it's an apartment or a house. And, if it's either the cost or just the lack of availability of that is preventing people from moving here, we're just going to see that talent barrier continue. So I think across the board, our community needs more housing, and certainly, as Chad referenced, the lack of labor to build that is a big challenge that everybody needs to be thinking about how we're gonna solve that, because it impacts all of us.
I mean, I think another thing quick, Zach, if you don't mind, the average house currently for new construction is 550,000. That's 20,000 more than last year for a home that's 150 square feet less. Um, in 2015, the average house was 300,000, so we had a 50% increase just in the last decade on the cost. So there's a small segment who can actually afford the current average house. And, from our members, they'd be like, I can't build 550, so I can't even believe the average is that number. So I think we have an issue where the affordability is coming into it, as well as just availability. They go hand in hand. But I think we're going to see some issues with that if we can't kind of figure out how we can slow the growth of cost, as well as adding just more product.
Yeah. I guess since you brought up Chad, I'm curious, Daryl Fairweather, our speaker at annual dinner, the Redfin chief economist, one of the things that she highlighted was speed to approval. That if you really want to get ahead of the population and housing challenges that we are facing, she specifically focused on this region's challenges. One of her recommendations was to the public sector leaders in the room. I mean, the mayor was in the room, the county exec was in the room, our congressmen, multiple candidates for higher office. Talk a little bit about, I guess I'll ask both of you guys this question, but talk a little bit about those barriers and the costs that get associated with the inability to move at speed when it comes to building housing.
Well, I think there's a couple things that are part of it. So it's, holding cost and the delays and then the uncertainty. So there's a couple bills on the state level that would be of assistance to this, more of zoning by right. If you have it in your comprehensive plan, a developer comes in, they said, hey, this matches your comprehensive plan. You don't have to worry about getting zoning approval. Like, that part's done. There's also discussions on there's a potential large impact by delaying the time that fees get implemented. That way more developers can enter the market. There's less of a barrier trying to finance large sums. Because I think most people don't realize that the developers purchase the land, they pay for all the infrastructure, and then they donate it to municipalities. And usually it's about 2 to 3 years before development actually breaks ground on houses. So that developer's holding those costs for 2 to 3 years. The faster that can go from submission to approvals and homes getting built, obviously that assists too. But even just delaying cost of fees, moving it along quicker, would make a significant impact.
Mark, thoughts there?
Yeah, I think
I know you have thoughts, but I was just.
I always have thoughts, Zach. It's whether or not you want to hear them. No, I think it's certainly a real issue. I mean, it's no, it's not a secret, right, that Madison has always been a more challenging place to build and go through that permitting and approval process. I mean, I do think the city has made improvements in terms of the expediency, and I'll say more so on the multifamily side, just because the single family world is not one that I'm familiar with. So I think there have been improvements there. One of the, I'll say, related challenges is there's oftentimes competing priorities, right? We want more housing, but then we want it to be more sustainable, or we want it to be more affordable in these locations. And so we're oftentimes trying to achieve multiple goals at once. And what that often does is add cost or complexity, right? And so figuring out how and where we can prioritize, because not every project, not every new house or apartment is going to be able to meet all of those kind of wish list items. But I think prioritization, and making sure that that gets factored into the decision and approval process is something we need to be thinking about.
To add to that too, I think one of the things that many municipalities don't realize is the product that they want to see their own codes don't allow. And so I think the Dane County Regional Housing Strategy, one of the goals of that is to provide kind of a checklist and template for zoning changes to actually allow some of those cottage neighborhoods or smaller density, smaller home neighborhoods that current zoning doesn't actually allow in a lot of municipalities. So a lot of the solutions that we could potentially use are going to require a lot of changes on the local level as well. And thankfully, I can say that we've seen a drastic shift over the last few years. Local municipality leaders and elected staff have really been pro housing and want to get ahead of it. We're just a decade or two behind schedule. So.
Yeah. I was in Janesville last night for their chamber's annual dinner, and sitting at a table with a group of property owners and developers, and we're asking, they sort of had the caricature of Dane County elected officials from 20 years ago. And I said, what's interesting about it is many of our elected officials are probably as liberal or maybe even more liberal than they've ever been, but it's probably the most pro-housing set of elected officials that we've had in a very long time, if not ever. Mark, one of the things you addressed, you said you're seeing that this return to office is, not just a national trend, but we're seeing it here. I'm curious about what does that mean for tenant improvements? What does it mean for the mix of how you guys think about your blend of offices? What kind of trends are we seeing businesses do to bring people back into the office or create inviting spaces? Are there trends that we should all be aware of?
I think the overarching one is the flight to quality, right? Businesses that want to have people in their office, in their space, are investing in being in newer, nicer space. And so, I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a disparity between occupancy downtown versus occupancy in more suburban locations. So I think that flight to quality is really, really holding true and continuing to grow. The other thing a lot of companies are doing is they're rethinking kind of the use and the mix of their space, right? So I'll pick on law firms as an example. A lot of them nowadays, they don't want the big corner, large offices. So they're shrinking their offices, but then they're putting more of that square footage into communal spaces, whether it's their kitchen or their break room or their gathering spaces. So, we're seeing that shift where companies are trying to not just create spaces for an employee to come and sit at their computer and work, because they can do that at home in a lot of cases. They're trying to create those collaborative shared spaces that entice people to want to come back into the office. So I think it's just how people are planning their spaces and the use of their spaces where we're seeing that shift.
So let's shift, using the word shift, to some of the AI stuff that we asked about. I won't I think you both identified it as a sort of an interesting thing to note. And so I think we probably can all expect that it will continue to be present in businesses. I'm curious about how your businesses are using AI. What are the, are there things that you're doing using artificial intelligence that are new or novel Are you leaning into the generative side? Just curious how the two of you see AI used today in your own businesses.
I mean, we use it a lot on the marketing and administrative side still. I think we probably use it more than we anticipate that we use it. I think that's probably a common theme if you talk to people and really talked about the products and software that they're using. Um, we, I mean, we haven't really dove head first in though. So I think that's still an area that we're trying to figure out what product works for us from a nonprofit trade association side. And then from the industry perspective, I think there's hesitance and also a question on how it can be used. And I think there's, the construction industry never really got into automation, yet alone into AI. So I think as we move and we see more panelization and modular homes being built, at that automation perspective, a lot of people are then also tying in AI to it as well. So I think it's a slow move from the construction industry perspective, but there's certainly individuals out there who are pushing the envelope. And from a marketing administrative perspective, that's probably where you're going to see it most in that industry.
And AI can't swing a hammer, so that's
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably talking to the wrong two people when it comes to AI. I mean, as you can see, I still print most of the plans on paper when I'm doing my reviews. So, I mean, I think primarily what we're seeing is just again in those kind of third-party add-ins, right? The Microsoft suite of products where it's starting to get integrated and people are kind of dabbling and using it there. But as far as sort of more company-wide or wholesale integration or adoption, we're not there yet. And a lot of the businesses that we talk to, at least it's that same thing, right? They're using the products that are out there from the third parties, as opposed to really sort of developing and investing heavily on their own.
yeah. I do have a question we'll ask you some other day about what if government were using AI to help speed up the review of your plan, but that'll be a topic for a different day. But all right, I have two questions left and we have 2 minutes. And so last year we had one defining word for the survey. When we did this, we said optimism was the defining word. And so in a word or two or three, how would you describe this year's results? And Mark, I'll start with you.
I'd say probably transition. It feels like we're kind of in a transition period between that optimism and more of that uncertainty and unknown. So, I think transition period is probably how I would describe what we saw from the survey.
Yeah. Chad, 1 or 2 words?
I mean, I'd say on par. I think the results fit with what we've heard and what I think most individuals would see the results and kind of look at it and be like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Kind of fits the narrative that we've seen. I think Mark's probably right though that this is hopefully maybe this isn't 24, 25, this is 26, 27 finally are the transition years where we see it kind of take off and that optimism comes to reality.
All right. So final question, 2026, what's your prediction? Can be for your organization, business, for the region. Just give me a prediction for 2026. We'll come back next year and see if you were right.
I think it's going to be more of the same. I think we're going to see Madison to continue to be a really attractive place for people to be. And I think we're probably still going to be talking about the same affordability, lack of housing conversation next year.
Right. Got
Yeah, I think that's correct. I do think that with interest rates starting to come down, we've seen now that it's finally at more than 50% of people have an interest rate over 5% versus under 5% now, that there's going to be kind of a shift in consumers to start considering this is the buy time. The problem is going to be, like Mark mentioned, availability and affordability. I'm thinking end of 26 is when we're going to start seeing really big things start to be able to happen from a national perspective for sure, and hopefully locally as well.
Well, I want to thank you guys both. Certainly could talk to you all day about this stuff and certainly appreciate you giving us some time and able to pick your brain. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Perkins Coie, for supporting the program. Sort of a great conversation, and we appreciate all of you spending your lunch with us. We'll see you next time right here on Lunch Update.